upon a time, there was a village. And it was a village not unlike how Viroqua is and has been a village, where the people are doing their work and their chores and their visitings and their celebratings and their coming togethers and their leavings and their partings and their livings and their dyings. And in the midst of all of this village churning, there lived an old woman. And there worked an old woman. And there walked an old woman. And this woman had no husband, and she had no children. And she lived alone in a small, modest hut on the edge of the village, right where the woods started to get thick. She lived right on the edge of that, kind of looking over the village from the side. Actually, in fact, to be quite accurate about it, she had to hike a little ways through the woods from the village to get to her house. And because she didn't really have a garden of her own, she had plenty of time to help other people with their work. She would look after people's young ones when they were really small and they had a lot of work to do in the fields. She would help people in their gardens. She would help them clean their houses. She would help them with their animals. She would help them at harvest time. She would help them with the sowing and the planting and the mending. She was very helpful, and she knew a lot. And she was a sweet, cheerful old woman, and no matter how hard she worked, all she ever asked for was a wedge of bread and a big lump of cheese. And that's what she got from every one of the house dwellers who she helped out, and she would put it in her basket. And she would hobble back to her house. And she would open the door. That's the universal thing for open the door. Help me out. And her door was pretty squeaky because she didn't tend to it much. And she would go inside of her little bear hut. Not a bear hut. Not for bears. No, a bear hut. And she would go into the corner, and there in the fireplace, cold as can be, no stack of firewood, would be the little kindling and pine cones and pine needles that she had gathered from that morning. And they would have been sitting in the hearth from where there had been a fire the night before, and they would get nice and toasty and dry. And usually by the time she got home, they were the perfect consistency for starting a fire. Not a big fire, of course. She just ate it to eat by and warm her toes while she ate her bread and her lump of cheese, and then she'd go to sleep and start it all over the next day. It was a very modest living, but she did it without complaining. And she was very cheery, and she was very sweet, and the whole village loved her. And they didn't quite know what to do with the fact that all she ever asked for was a wedge of bread and a lump of cheese. But there you go. Well, at the very least, one thing they did was all look out for her. And the way that all of them looked out for her was to say, at the end of every day, now be careful. When you're going home through the woods in the dark, don't let the Hedley Kow get you. Because the Hedley Kow was kind of a pain. It's kind of hard to categorize what the Hedley Kow was. People might have called him a poltergeist or a leprechaun or they didn't really have a name for what he was. They just knew he wasn't a human. That was one thing you definitely could not call the Hedley Kow, because he could change shape anytime he wanted to. He could make all kinds of sounds that no human being should ever have any business attempting to make. And besides that, he didn't have the tact of a human being. In fact, the thing he loved best about human beings was messing with their sense of tact and scaring the bejesus out of them. Not in some kind of malicious way, but just in the kind of way where your brother jumps out at you when you're walking around a corner. That kind of, or like pulls a chair out from under you. It was very practical joke, scary, but I swear nobody did it better than the Hedley Kow in the history of ever. He was just the worst. And so it was more with a sense of annoyance and foreboding that the neighbors would say, now be careful. Going through the woods, you don't want to get gotten by the Hedley Kow. And the older the old woman got, they just wondered if she had a heart condition or the kind of thing where seeing the Hedley Kow could be really hard on her countenance and her health. And they wanted to look out for her, so they would say, be careful when you're going through the woods. You don't want to run into the Hedley Kow. She would say, oh, darling, don't you worry, I'll be just fine. But, you know how it goes. On one of these nights, she found herself walking back. The chores had taken longer than you thought they would. In the midst of the chore she was working on, the goat got loose in the pen and she had to help bring it back in, and then she had to mend the fence, help mend the fence where the goat had gotten loose through, and then when she came back inside there was still all the dishes to do. Oh, and then there was that mending in the corner, and one thing led to another. Before you knew it, she was walking home in the dark. But draft horse and the wagon out so that you don't have to, like, oh, don't even make a fuss over it, it'll be fine, don't you worry. So, the old woman took her wedge of bread and her lump of cheese, and she put them in a basket, and she wrapped her shawl around her, and she made the slow, heavily walk through the village, past the butcher shop, past the blacksmith, past the miller, past the, who else? In these villages, we don't have a whole lot of these folks around it. Not really. Yeah, past the cobbler, past the houses, past the milkman, past the baker, and the grocer, and who else? The butcher, the barrel maker. Thank you. It was a very well stocked village. It had everything. The livestock, the blacksmith, the stonemasons, passed by all of these. And you could get the lumberjack, yeah. And you could say that all of them looked out their window and they kind of could hear the little old woman scrabbling on her way home and gumming her toothless lips and singing some kind of tuneless tune to herself as she walked her way home. And she started walking through the woods and she heard a noise. This is what I'm doing. She didn't do this. She just kept walking. Until beside a tree, she was coming upon him. Mind you, her vision wasn't very good anymore, and it was quite dark. It took her a moment to see that under that tree there, down at the base of it, there was a cauldron. And she said, oh, isn't it right luck to find a cauldron in the midst of the night? I bet somebody left it here and there's a hole in the bottom, but who knows? I could use it to plant flowers and make my front porch a little bit more pretty. And so she goes up to it, and she sees that she walks around it a little bit, and the cauldron looks perfectly operable. Nothing wrong with it at all. Clean. Even. Oh, just my luck, it's a perfectly operable cauldron. Oh my goodness, and I'll take it home with me. And who knows what, oh, I can't wait, I haven't had a cauldron in so long. I've been living on bread and cheese all these years without the use of a cauldron. She looked closer, and just to see, because on the outside you don't know what the bottom is like, she lifted the lid, expecting to see an empty, possibly rusted cauldron. She was taken aback, and it took her a moment, and she just stood looking for a long time. Yes. It was a pile of gold coins. Oh, my stars and gardens, she said to herself. Oh, and then she walked around, but this time it was faster and faster, and she wanted to reach for them. She felt, who could have possibly left this cauldron full of gold coins here? In fact, they were such solid gold that they were shining, it seemed, like they were iridescent in the darkening night. Oh, and she picked one up, and with the 2 teeth she had left, she did that thing that's the infamous gold test in every movie. So you can check and see if it's gold. And I think what that means is that gold dents pretty easily, doesn't it? Yeah. So if it's gold, you should be able to dent it with your teeth. And wouldn't you know it, with the 2 teeth she had left, it was gold after all. Gold coins, real gold coins, and she began to mutter to herself this kind of praise and thanks, and oh my goodness, my stars, my life has changed forever. I can't believe this. It's a cauldron full of gold coins. My life has changed. I wonder what I should do. Maybe I should buy a house, a fine house in town. And while that she was daydreaming about all the things that she might do, and oh, maybe I could hire a servant who could cook for me every day. And then I would have even more time to go around and help the villagers. And oh, maybe I could help mend that fence that man wanted to have fixed. And I always wanted to have a coach and 4, and to travel in far off parts. Oh, can you imagine them seeing me in the coach and 4, little old busy woman that I am? And the whole time she was saying all this, she was putting the lid on the cauldron. And she couldn't really pick up the cauldron, and it was full of gold coins. And if you've ever held a cauldron, how many of you have held a cauldron full of gold coins before? She couldn't pick it up. So the best that she could manage was to take the shawl off of her shoulders and loop it through the iron handle of the cauldron. And then she kind of like situated it just so, and she began to drag it behind her along the path. And it made this heavy cauldron draggy sound as she hobbled through the woods in the dark, all the while saying to herself, oh my goodness, my life has changed forever, I can't believe it. Oh, and every now and then she would look back and make sure that the cauldron hadn't stumbled over a rock and spilled coins and that the lid wasn't rattling, but it wasn't. It was perfectly fine. And this peach went on for a while until after a while it occurred to her to look back and check and make sure that everything was all right. And she looked back expecting to open the cauldron and make sure the coins were there and that she wasn't crazy. And she looked back. It was very odd. Because her shawl was no longer attached to a cauldron with gold coins inside. In fact, her shawl wasn't attached to a cauldron. In fact, her shawl wasn't attached to anything. It was actually wrapped around something, a big lump of something. And what is this? She opened up the shawl and she looked inside, and it was a shining lump of silver. How many of you have ever actually seen a lump of silver? I've seen things made out of silver, but I love the thought of this. It was just a giant lump, as you would get it, pure out of the ground, a giant lump of silver. In those days, a very valuable thing. Very, very valuable silver. Now, many other characters in many other stories might have been a little disappointed that the cauldron full of gold coins wasn't there anymore. Many people would have immediately, though they hadn't had it 5 minutes before, said, "Where's my cauldron of gold coins? I cannot believe this," and just stood wringing their hands in the midst of the forest, just so upset that their cauldron of gold coins was gone. Do you think she's that kind of character? No. You know what she did? "Oh, bless my stars and gardens, isn't it amazing? It's a lump of silver. Oh, it's not quite a cauldron of gold coins, but that's too much anyway. I would have been fretting over it and wondering about it, and I wouldn't worry about it, and that would just be silly with silver. It's so much more practical. I could have it boiled down by the smith to make something lovely, or maybe I would just put it on the mantle as something nice to look at." She didn't even miss a beat. She wrapped her shawl back up and she kept on walking with the lump of silver bumping along behind her on the path. And thus it went. And she was closer to home than she had been before. And she decided that she would look behind her one more time, to make sure that the lump of silver was still there, attached inside her shawl. And she looked back, and she saw that it was a lump, but just because of what had happened before, she thought she should check. And she looked into the shawl, and there was no longer a lump of silver there. Instead, it was a big ball of iron. Not unlike a cannonball, but not quite so round. What do you think she did? She said, "Oh, just my luck! I can't believe I'm so lucky to have a lump of iron wrapped up in my shawl. Isn't it wonderful? Oh my goodness, silver would have been too much to worry about. Yes, it's shiny, but mine is so much more practical. I can take this to the blacksmith. Oh, and have it make me a cauldron. Oh, I always wanted a cauldron. Wouldn't that be nice? Or maybe I could make some shoes for the horse that is down the way and doesn't have shoes on it." And this pattern was kept going for a long time. That's all right. What is this one like? Hi, Rio. Can everybody say hi, Rio? Hi, Rio. Cheers to you, dear one. Didn't miss a beat. So excited about this lump of iron that was wrapped up in her shawl, until finally she was almost at her front door and she looked back, because by now she thought this was all kind of amusing that this thing kept changing, and she looked back and it was no longer a lump of iron in her shawl that she saw. Wrapped up in her shawl was a stone, a plain stone. Now, not just a greedy character. You could feel sad that you no longer have a cauldron full of gold coins. You could feel disappointed that you no longer had a lump of silver. You could feel disappointed that you no longer have a lump of iron. But if all you're left with is a stone, many of us would be beyond disappointed. Be like, "Well, shoot, it's a stone." What do you think she said? Oh, just the size stone I've wanted to prop my door open on days when it's hot. I can't believe my luck. Oh, joy. And she went through her gate, humming to herself, smacking her toothless lips, so excited by her luck. And of course, as she was going through her gate and about to haul the thing up her steps, she looks back to make sure that it was no longer a stone wrapped in her shawl. Well, it was for about a split second, but then it started to change from a stone into this kind of gangly, long, getting taller all the time creature that looked kind of like a horse and kind of like a manatee and kind of like a praying mantis And it looked straight in her eyes, and it rolled its eyes backwards, and it went, now, anybody else would have been scared right out of their pants at the sight of this being. But wouldn't you know it, our dear friend, the old woman said, "Oh, you must be the Hedley Kow. I was wondering if you were making the trick play on me. You're such a funny one, you are. I haven't seen you in many a year. How are you? Why don't you come inside and have a cup of tea?" And the Hedley Kow stood there. But you're not running away from me. Oh no, darling, I knew that it was you. You're quite a trickster, you are. Come inside, come inside. She didn't even look back at this fright on her doorstep with its eyes rolling back and its teeth all dangly and drooly and turned around and went inside and started getting the things ready for tea. So wouldn't you know it, the Hedley Kow took a form that you and I rarely get to see the Hedley Kow take. He took his actual form, which looks more like a gnome or a nissa, just like a tiny little man with big feet, big ears, and a big long beard, and a little red hat. Okay? And he walked in the door, and he shut it behind him. And wouldn't you know it, they had the best tea in the world. She set out the wedge of bread and the lump of cheese, which she didn't even say anything when she noticed that the lump of cheese was a little bit bigger. And she didn't say anything when she noticed that there was crumpets on the plate as well as the bread. And she didn't say anything when there was a roaring fire made of more than just pine cones and pine needles there in the fire. And that night the Hedley Kow told her stories that made her laugh until she could not breathe. And she was crying down the sides of her eyes, hearing all the amazing tricks that the Hedley Kow had played on the village for years and years and years and years from time out of mind. And she said, "Oh, Hedley Kow, you're such a funny dear one. You come by my house anytime you like, you hear me?" And wouldn't you know it, he did. So, the story ends much as it started, with the old woman going throughout the town and helping people with what they needed help with. But then every couple of nights a week, the Hedley Kow would come over for tea. And on those nights they would laugh and roar, and when she looked into her pantry and saw it stocked with food, she didn't say anything. And when she looked into the storage shed and saw it filled with firewood freshly split and dried, she did not say anything. But what she would say anytime somebody said to her late at night, "Be careful when you go home, the Hedley Kow might get you," she would just wave it away and say, "Oh no, that man likes to kick up his heels, he does, and he's such a jokester. Oh, you should see him."